single biggest lunatic in the West Wing.
Okay, good evening, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion House, New Mexico, working on oil painting Death of a Salesman. Alright, I want to play with the light on this one a whole lot. I want a bright light cascading down into the alleyway from the background. But before I do that, I'm going to block in and layer up some bright colors on all of the buildings. So, here we go.
I guess like really awful, simplistic stereotype of a pretentious academic, except he's not really an academic, which makes it even more fun and funny. He's more just kind of like a Fox News guy. But we did this mashup with him because as like everything is crumbling around Trump and everyone can see that he's just an idiot, Sebastian Gorka goes on TV to tell everyone that President Trump is the most intelligent man we've ever had, etc. So we did this mashup of all of Sebastian Gorka's detachment from reality statements mixed in with Alice in Wonderland.
If I had a world of my own, everything would be nonsense. Nothing would be what it is, because everything would be what it isn't. And contrariwise, what it is, it wouldn't be. And what it wouldn't be, it would. You see?
Absurdities. It was a fabulous press conference.
In my world, you wouldn't say,
My gosh, we've done more work in 1 month than the Prime Administration did in 6 months.
oh, but you would. You'd say,
Based upon my experience, there isn't any disorder, any chaos.
why in my world,
Fantasy. This is fake news. It doesn't matter. Distortions. It's fabricated. That's the reality. Your representation is just wishful thinking. It doesn't work. And we are again in this world.
I keep wishing it would be that way, because my world would be a wonderland.
This is Intercepted. So, I feel like I threw a whole scattered oral journey at you and tried to share with you some of what we're trying to do that's not just doom and gloom. But I'm happy to take any questions or hear any comments or talk further about any aspect of all of this, but mostly just thank you guys for showing up tonight and hanging out with us.
And he said there is no objectivity really in reporting. And on the Intercept's website, the term adversarial journalism is invoked. So I was wondering if you could explain specifically what you mean by adversarial journalism.
Well, I mean, one of the things when we started the Intercept in 2013, 2014, one of the things that we were witnessing was, particularly under President Obama, was an incredibly cozy relationship between the elite Washington press corps and powerful players within the administration, including Obama himself. And perhaps the most obvious iteration of this is the institution known as the White House Correspondents Association's annual dinner. They call it Nerd Prom because they think it's cool to be nerds, and they're not really nerds and ha ha ha, but it's really an idiotic gathering of celebrities mingling with media personalities who are playing the role of journalists on CNN and MSNBC and Fox and CNN. And at these dinners, President Obama repeatedly joked about Guantanamo and holding prisoners there. His first public mention of drone strikes, even though he was conducting them at record numbers, was to make a joke about killing people with drone strikes at the White House Correspondents Association dinner. Vice President Joe Biden would have an annual picnic for reporters at the Vice President's manor, where they would have super soaker fights between people in the administration and the White House press corps. And there's this elite kind of crowd in DC that really runs a great deal of the media in this country and decides what is news and what isn't news. And they're all intermingling with the most powerful people in government. I never go to those dinners. I don't want anything to do with being friendly or cozy with powerful people whose decisions affect the lives of millions, at times billions of people across the globe. And what we were seeing is that there's a line that will not be crossed when journalists are reporting on their friends in power. And one of the greatest examples of that is just to look at the career of Chuck Todd, who pretends to be a journalist every week on Meet the Press and is on MSNBC. I mean, Chuck Todd is one of the most sycophantic, pathetic non-journalists to be celebrated as an actual journalist. He is a fawning of the powerful, a poo-pooer of anyone who sort of challenges the way things are. He said very early on in the Obama era that the people calling for accountability over the CIA torture program are silly people who are engaging in cable catnip. And what he was doing was running defense for the Obama administration, which was backing away from the pledge to actually implement some form of accountability for that. And you see it also in the books of Bob Woodward, who was an amazing journalist a long time ago, and broke the Watergate stories with Carl Bernstein. Carl Bernstein has remained a very good journalist. Bob Woodward is basically the official stenographer of the presidency. And he goes in and he writes these all-access fairy tales about what's happening in each administration. Maybe his book on Trump will be tough. I mean, some of these people seem to have found a spine in the past couple of months. But when we started The Intercept, it was, our entire lives in journalism, me and Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras, we had just been watching the kind of way that the news media was used as a conveyor belt for the assertions of the powerful. And so the mere fact that we had to say, we are going to be an adversarial news organization, to us felt a little silly, because the press should be adversarial by nature. And so part of why we resurrected that word, which was a word that I.F. Stone, the legendary muckraking journalist, often would talk about, that we needed adversarial press, and that it's actually good for our democracy. It's good for transparency. If you have a news media that composed of journalists who don't view themselves as Democrats or Republicans, but as journalists, and that they believe in holding those in power accountable, whether they are Democrats or Republicans or another entity, or whether they're heads of corporations in the US or heads of corporations elsewhere, that the notion of holding those in power accountable is sacrosanct and can never be subjected to personal friendship veto. And I think that culturally, that's been a big problem in Washington. The last thing I'll say on this is that because Trump is working with so many people that are not considered, he says he's draining the swamp. He's actually just filling the swamp with a different kind of creature, and in a way, I think it's more dangerous. I mean, he has wholesale outsourced staffing at various federal agencies to private companies and to the Koch brothers, who have this radical legislative agenda that they've been pushing. Whereas Obama's people would take all of the think tankers from the Democratic think tanks, they would go to certain universities and find, neoliberal law professors who can come in and help figure out how to sort of change this, but really let's keep pushing forward with the agenda of empire. Trump's brought in a whole different crew of people, and they're not friends with any of those reporters, which is refreshing in a way, but it's interesting to see what it's done when it's not everybody's friendly hanging out at Joe Biden's house with the super soaker. All of a sudden, they seem to be like becoming journalists. So I welcome that. I think it's great. But if Hillary Clinton had won, I think we would not be seeing this kind of rededication to the idea that an aggressive press is central to our democracy. I think it would have just been a 4 or 8 year extension of the career-long nap all of these people have been on.
So when you were setting up The Intercept, was there an effort to, was it consideration that you wanted to make The Intercept look as different as possible from other traditional news organizations?
It's a great question, and I would say that we have not, until fairly recently, dedicated serious enough resources to thinking about the visual concepts and the way that the site is presented. Before actually giving you a direct answer to that, I just want to tell you one technical thing, and that is that because we came out of the gate saying we want to be this, this, and this, and also because we were the stewards of the documents from NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, we wanted to build a website that maintained no data on anyone that ever visited it. and it is very, very difficult to build that kind of a site and still have user functionality. So part of the constraints that we're dealing with is that we have created a site that only in a handful of occasions collects absolutely no data on anyone. There are some programs that have to do with video and audio where we do have to open up a certain spigot, but none of it is data that we retain. But in general, we have the most radical privacy policy of any news organization in the country. If you use the Chrome browser, for instance, and you put this extension into it called Privacy Badger, it will show you how many trackers are being planted on your computer just from visiting CNN. BuzzFeed is like off the charts. They're like sticking 60-something trackers on your computer every time you go there. And some of them are malicious trackers that are like phoning home with personal data of yours. And if you look at the intercept, we either have 0 or there's 1, depending on if there's a video on the page. Having said that very boring thing, that creates a challenge then for creating a dynamic website. And the big thing was about the snowflakes of the snowflakes, what do you call it, the New York Times thing that they did. It was praised as this huge leap forward in journalism layout and design. And we kind of went in a little bit of a different direction. And I would say that where we're at our weakest right now is in the presentation of our actual main page of our website. Where we're at our strongest is when we do in-depth reporting series. Like my colleagues and I did a series called the Drone Papers, and we decided instead of publishing articles over the course of 2 weeks, that we would create essentially an online multimedia book that was in chapters. And we built the entire back-end architecture for it, and you should check it out. It's really interesting. We worked with animators and illustrators and others, and so it's a dynamic feeling immersion into the world of this leak of secret documents about the drone program that were provided to us by someone who directly worked on the drone program. And we've had some really great artists and graphic designers that have done a variety of projects for us, and there are some of our stories where we're working entirely with illustrators. But the challenge we're trying to overcome right now to create the kind of homepage experience is more challenging than just the design questions. So we now have a team of coders that are embedded with our design people design people say, we want to do this, and then the coders are looking at, how can we do this? One just kind of funny, quirky example, we created a totally new shade of red for the internet. It had never existed before, and our designer, Philip Hubert, who's a German guy, who's really a brilliant guy, he wanted this particular red that we were using for a book that we were publishing, and he wanted it to be that red on the Drone Papers webpage. And they couldn't, he's so meticulous, typical German, but he's like, no, it's still off. And to me, I'm colorblind, so I can't even see red and green really. But he would just be like, my friends who are not colorblind would say like, I think Philip is like having problems here because he's like, look exactly the same. No, it's not. If you look here, it's anyway, the coders figured out a way to manipulate the coding for the color red so that it could appear exactly as Philip wanted it. Which is like, to me it seems totally nuts to do something like that. But there are like articles written about this because it's not just about people will like the shade of red. I don't know if you would like it or not. But it's the idea that it's showing you that you can do this kind of a thing. The same is true for the platform that we built with this analytics firm called Parsley. They have a great analytics service that a lot of news organizations use, but it collects an enormous amount of private data. So we worked with Parsley, and our coders helped them rewrite the back end of Parsley to offer news organizations, not just us. Everything we do, we make open source, to create a way where you can get some analytics and some sense of where your readers are without retaining any actual data on the individual. And so we will go down like the rabbit hole and spend like 8 months doing something like that at the expense of, maybe we should have the homepage look like this. So it's kind of a weird place in that sense. Final thing is though, almost no one goes to web pages anymore directly. What we found is that the vast majority of people end up coming to our site because they either are subscribed to various feeds or it's from social media. They know they're going to see it on Facebook, and it takes them there. So there's a lot less focus these days on what does your homepage look like, and a lot more focus on the experience that each piece of content gives the reader. Is that makes sense?
And I'll just, okay, and while I'm walking, I will say one really cool thing about the site, if you haven't listed it, is you kind of skip the intermediary step of footnotes in one of your articles and move directly back to these source documents, which is fantastic.
That's a big thing that we do. I mean, we work with a lot of primary source documents, and we don't want to just stick PDFs up. I mean, there are old school people that say, can you stick the PDF? So we have everything is available as PDFs, but what we try to do with documents is bring them to life, because a lot of it is sort of, it's really boring, or it's confusing, or there's a lot of acronyms, and so one of the things we try to do is extract parts of the documents and give you the option of blowing them up. And in some of them, we created our own form of annotation. And in some stories, like we had a story that involved about Navy SEAL Team 6. That's a really involved narrative nonfiction story about the legacy of SEAL Team 6. And I think we had either 5 or 6 anonymous sources in that. They were guys that had been in SEAL Team 6, and for obvious reasons, we knew who they were, obviously, but we weren't going to print their names. So we were trying to think, like, how do you tell a story when you have 6 anonymous people? We could call them Mr. Pink and Mr. White. Yeah, that's kind of, that kind of sucks. Then you could do like a really lengthy, this guy who did this, and then that, and then it gets too long. So we created a very non-invasive way where if you put your mouse over a particular source, so we wrote it the way we write it journalistically, it would then bring up and it would remind you who that person is, and then just go away. Like it floats up for a second and goes away. But to do that within the context of a news article that can be viewed in different forms was a bit of a technical challenge, but it was really, it ended up being a very interesting way of telling a complicated story involving characters that you couldn't overtly distinguish for the uninitiated or someone who literally just came to your site and read that story. So we're always trying to figure out ways to make really complicated technical documents, but also stories accessible and something you don't have to take in all at once. You can come back to it and look at different aspects of it.
My husband and I are big fans of your work as a source of truth.
Oh wow, thank you.
How do you get funding for these complex, wonderful presentations?
If you and I were talking like 5 years ago, I would have been asking you right now to get your checkbook out. And then for all I know, you've given to Democracy Now! And other things. Okay, there you go. So I'll answer this 2 ways. One is, for the vast majority of my life, I've worked in poverty media, where you spend, on average, minimum 2 or 3 months a year fundraising, and basically begging for the money that will facilitate you doing what you really want to be doing. And I did that at Democracy Now! And Pacifica Radio. I did it when I was at the nonprofit Nation Institute. And so most of my journalism has been funded by donations over the years. The reason I say 5 years ago is because if we talked 5 years ago and you said to me, you and I are going to be at an event in 2017, and I'm going to ask you this question, and this is the answer you're going to give, I would have told you, lady, I want some of that crack, because it seems real good. We are funded by a billionaire named Pierre Omidyar, who was the founder of eBay, and he was contemplating buying the Washington Post, for $250 million. And Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras and I had just started working together, and this would have been in 2012 or so, and 2012, 2013. And we had known each other for a long time, and we just had gotten together, and we were thinking of starting our own very small news organization, and we were going to fund it the way I just described before, where we were going to get grants and have donations and have reader and viewer funded content. And I was in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, where Glenn lives with his 23 dogs and his husband. It's like canine Planet of the Apes at that guy's house down there. There's monkeys running around throwing banana peels at his dogs, and it's really it's an interesting place. This guy like took on the most powerful government in the world, and he was doing interviews about like the Snowden documents early stages, wearing Hawaiian shorts, flip-flops, and then on the top a suit. And he'd be like talking to CNN, and then he would finish, and it'd be like 5 dogs would jump on him, and it's like, okay, this Glenn guy is really interesting. we're there and we get this, Glenn gets an email from a mutual friend of ours and Pierre Omidyar, and the guy basically says, this guy, Pierre, follows you guys on Twitter, he thinks you're really interesting, he's considering buying the Washington Post, but he may also just want to build his own news organization, would you be interested in talking with him? So the next day, we're on the phone with him, and he basically said, I'm thinking of building my own news organization. And the original vision of it was to be like an omnibus news organization, like a Huffington Post or a Washington Post or something, but online. And we were just going to play one small role in it, and what became The Intercept was originally just going to be a part of a bigger news organization. But then all kinds of controversy happened, and there were false starts, and it's sort of the world of venture capitalists and Silicon Valley still, I'm baffled by it. The only part of it that I relate to in our office is we have a ping pong table. What ended up happening is they were trying to figure out what they wanted to do as their bigger thing, and we were getting concerned that we were going to get batted around, a bit too much. So we negotiated with Pierre Omidyar to make The Intercept a nonprofit news organization, and he, for now, it has a philanthropic commitment to fund it. So we have a knowable budget, we have total editorial autonomy. He has never once said anything to us, and he knows if he did, we would go public with it. And we have a good relationship with him, but he knows never to say anything about what he wants us to cover or not cover, and we've reported on him. And he wasn't happy about that, but he didn't say, you're done. Which to us, that was like, we know that we're dealing with a legit, honest person when you can say something critical about that person in their inner circle, and call them out. And privately, not happy, publicly, you have every right to do it. So we don't have $250 million, which keeps getting reported. That was the budget for this whole thing. We have about 50 staffers right now. We try to pay people 10 to 15% more than they would get at another news organization, because we're going to be asking people to do serious, grueling work. And also we want to have a progressive vibe to our workspace. We're not doing a lot of foreign reporting right now, in part because I'm blocking it. I want us to have the most progressive insurance policy, not only for journalists that are doing the reporting, but also for the people that are working in support of them, the fixers, the translators, and others. And that's, I didn't know how complicated of a negotiation that is, not with the company, but with insurance companies. But eventually we will get into foreign reporting. And we're blessed to have one funder. The risk of that, though, is they could decide tomorrow, I'm done, and then what do you do? But for now, we know that we have stability, and we kind of think of things in terms of 3 years out rather than 10 years out. We think of it as every month that we have our budget is a blessing, and when people come to work for us, we are very transparent. We think we're totally stable. We could be wrong, and tomorrow the whole thing could be shut down. It's a weird world. Financing of journalism is tough, and I feel like we're extremely fortunate. After 15 years of just begging my relatives and strangers for money, it's nice to not have to spend 2-3 months a year doing that. So,
I also grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Michigan and left X number of years ago, came east, and my company that I work for now is called the Futures Company, and we do kind of insights and foresights for organizations to let them see what's going to happen in the future, right? And we just finished a post-election bit of research around the Rust Belt.
But this is a movie you're writing here, or you're?
No.
I
work for a company, and it's called the Futures Company, or now it's called Kantar Futures. It was aggregated by other companies. But we help organizations understand, anticipate, and shape change over the next 3 to 7 to 10 years. And we just finished a research project around the Rust Belt and post-election voting. One of the things that came up, not unsurprisingly, but also the way it came back through the research was somewhat surprising, is that obviously there is real pain and real suffering going on in a lot of these territories because the economy has left a lot of people behind for many reasons. But the key thing that I took away was that the American dream has changed to not growing and becoming better, but to actually just to be able to hold on to what they have. And I'm wondering what bearing you think any of this has on what type of antagonism or militarism could kind of seep back into our country in a bigger way. Obviously, we're seeing it around the world, When does it come here, or does it come here? Not to scare everybody.
No, but that's, I mean, it's a great question, and it's also a really complicated one that I think a lot of us in this room probably contribute to for a very lengthy discussion. One of the things that I think we have to come to terms with from Trump's election is that I think one of the major factors, I think Trump mobilized a group of non-voters from a very hardcore, uneducated, racist set of communities around the country. And those were people that historically did not vote, and I think that that was part of what made the difference. I also think that part of his brokering with the Republican Party and the inclusion of Mike Pence as the VP made a difference. I think the fact that Hillary Clinton, you could not have had a more visible, famous representation of establishment politics. And for anyone that thinks that I'm wrong about that, look at the numbers in some states of people that twice voted for Barack Obama and voted for Donald Trump. How on earth could that be possible? Well, in 2008, the perception was that Barack Obama was new, he was young, he had not spent his career in Washington, he was the outsider. And then in 2012, you have Obama running against Mitt Romney, that Democrats would not really vote for Mitt Romney, but also he represented a different kind of the establishment. So there's a way in which, if you look at a kind of micro trend about how people voted from 2008 to the present, there is a not so insignificant number of people that seem to be voting based on a rejection of the existing order. It's not about, I want what Trump is saying. I don't want this other thing. I don't want this to continue. Any shakeup or change has to be better than what we have right now. And I'm not by no means giving a comprehensive analysis of why I think Trump won. I'm bringing up two things in relation to what you're talking about. I do think that we as a society are being, well, first of all, the myth of the American dream for many people has been shattered, and it's evolved over the years. And if you watch it through propaganda, through the way that it's portrayed on television and in commercials and in film, it's interesting. There's this enormous number of dystopian films and young adult novels, and all this stuff has become very popular. It's become very popular because people are experiencing that reality. Record numbers of people are living with their parents, well into their 20s. You live in a different society than the post-World War II, boom years, and I do think that the kind of open xenophobia that is being popularized by the Trump moment creates fertile ground for very powerful, well-organized corporate or governmental institutions to really move in. And that's where you're pushing my militarism. I really fear that if we did have, not even another 9/11 attack, but if we had something even on a much smaller scale, but kind of spectacular in nature, that's the term that I'll use for these attacks, spectaculars.
All right, about ran the time out on this clip. I don't think I'm going to do another one right now.
Patriot Act, etc. That would look like child's play. And
So we'll just let that set up and do another layer next time. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Ranch in Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting The Death of a Salesman. Have a good night, Earth.
These guys spent their careers